spiritual mythologies that we know about. Forgiveness, and in the Bible, we're admonished to forgive 70 times 7 those who in any way offend us. And by way of today's title, I think I can pronounce this, Mahabharata, the Hindu epic, speaks of forgiveness this way. One should forgive under any injury. It has been said the continuation of the species is due to man's forgiving. Forgiveness is holiness. By forgiveness, the universe is held together. Forgiveness is the might of the mighty. Forgiveness is sacrifice. Forgiveness is quiet of mind. Forgiveness and gentleness are the qualities of the self-possessed. They represent eternal virtue. Now, let's talk about what forgiveness is and what it isn't. Let's get one thing straight first. God is not going to punish you. We don't believe in God that punishes anybody. The idea of a vengeful God is a misunderstanding. The greatest divine punishment is separation. If we don't forgive, we separate ourselves from our divine source because those feelings are not in keeping with love. And everyone is familiar with the biblical quote, the wages of sin is death. This refers to spiritual death that comes from cutting off the nourishment to the soul. And that's what we do when we don't forgive. In fact, we punish ourselves because our acts themselves originate in and perpetuate that very separation. And one of the things I'm going to say repeatedly throughout this talk is that the hardest person to forgive is, guess who? Ourselves. It is the hardest thing we ever do to forgive ourselves and the most important to do. Now, I can tell you what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not indifference to what happens. We don't get indifferent about it. In forgiving, we don't give up our powers of discrimination or discernment. And forgiveness does not prevent us from holding ourselves and others accountable. It doesn't. You're relieved to hear that forgiveness is not the human impersonation of a doormat. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is compassion in action. It's letting go. Ouch. That's hard for us. But that's what it is. It's letting go. And it's not a goal, it's a process. An eternal process, but a process. It's important to know that forgiveness is not the goal, but the process. The process is an end in itself. Some things to know about forgiveness. You cannot forgive because you should. You can only forgive because you are willing to. And you cannot forgive others if you are willing to forgive yourself. You can't. That's why forgiving ourselves is so important. There's only one person who ever benefits from your forgiveness, and it's not the other person. It's us. It's got to be us. I can tell you that forgiving is one of the most powerful things I've ever done. Dr. Joan Borisenko, author of Guilt is the Teacher, Loves the Lesson, included this about forgiveness. She says, forgiveness is the exercise of compassion and is both a process and an attitude. Forgiveness is a state of mind that may give rise to specific actions, but is not defined by those actions. But it isn't always easy, forgiveness. Anyone but him, I can't forgive her. I've said those things myself. But this is the time to work the hardest when you feel that way. To let go, to try utmost to find a glimmer of understanding and forgiveness for the person. Because forgiveness is a process of letting go. That's the ouch. But it's letting go. It's a process of getting your emotions to feel as if it never happened, even if you remember it. And it's amazing how powerful that is. And we must continue the process. Louise Hay said about forgiveness, she said, we may not know how to forgive, and we may not want to forgive, but the very fact we say we're willing to give Forgive begins the healing process. It is imperative for our own healing that we release the past and forgive everyone, including ourselves. It really does begin with ourselves, though. We can't forgive anyone else if we don't forgive us. And we can forgive ourselves for our judgments, we can forgive ourselves for our missteps, we can forgive ourselves for our mistakes, we can forgive ourselves for whatever, but everything. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my process of forgiveness because it wasn't easy. A couple of those I came to what is critically important realization, and I'll share it with you. Some things were going on in my life in which I invested a wee bit of judgment, resentment, and blame. And I had done that. And it was consuming me. It really was. I mean, I came to the realization it had become a little more uncomfortable at that point. So I spread it out before me, figuratively speaking, my personal array of blame, and I had a lot of it. Certainly less cumbersome, but still rather significant to my surprise and dismay. A little of this, a little of that. There were a lot of little things, but there was a couple of real big things. Like when I was like 18, my stepmother kicked me out, and my father didn't do anything about it, and I left my house, started working and everything. That was one thing, and there were things like that. So, anyway, the realization of what was required of me was clear, because by that time I was aware that blame and resentment are always unhealthy and unproductive. The blame and resentment is usually a mirror of unacknowledged guilt. Think about it. That blame and resentment are much more harmful to the person feeling them than their intended object. I guarantee you that's true. And that blame and resentment rob you of life and separate you from yourself and all that is good and desirable. And they do. It does. And it puts poisons out in your body too, by the way. We'll deal with health another time, but it does. I knew all of this, and yet I didn't want to know it, and I certainly didn't want to act on this knowing. And I looked at all of this again with an agonized look, and tears came to my eyes. A tidal of what pain came up inside of me, pain and resistance. And I turned to the face of wisdom, that eternal knowing present, and uttered my anguished cry. Must I give it all up? Must I get rid of all of it? Because it had been in me for so long. Do I have to get rid of it? Of course, I already know the answer. Of course you do. Is an inner conflict brand. And of course, the still, small voice whispered within me, answered so sweetly and quietly, yes, my child, all of it. And I thought it was too painful, and I can't, and keep this or that, you know. I can't lift it. My sister used to say I'm full of you know what, and I can't lift it. Still, I really knew I had no choice in the matter, so I gave myself up to it. And it continues today. There are things I need to forgive, not anything big anymore, but I forgive things. I have to. And it's a perpetual process. And myself, I have to forgive a lot, all the time, because I stumble and fall. Everybody does. And I don't know who wrote this, but when you come home to yourself without expectations, demands, ulterior motives, or one-way bargains, a fundamental change in the underlying structure of your life takes place. And that's true. So if there's anyone left to forgive, mostly yourself, I think, in this room, but I don't know. just saying, you ought to do it. In his book, Silence, Simplicity, and Solitude, a guy by the name of David Cooper wrote this. After identifying our wrongful acts, speech, or thoughts, we must search our hearts to find the place where we regret what we did. This is a place where in the deepest sense, we are ashamed. The more heightened our awareness and sensitivity, the deeper our shame. For we understand the impact on even the most trivial of our actions. When we have attained a level of regret, we promise never to consciously do the thing again. We may also add a prayer that we be prevented from unconsciously or accidentally doing so. So self-forgiveness, our starting point, is a process of identification, regret, and positive assertion. It's a process that involves a method for working to repair the spiritual parts that are broken in us and in the world. And when we do that, we become a light in the world. And we automatically move to a place of love. And when we think of forgiveness, sometimes there's a one-up, one-down situation. Forgiveness requires us to give up ideas of better or worse. We have to stop that. And we have a slide that says this. Forgiveness does not help us change the past. We cannot do that. We can never do that. But it helps us change the future. That's the magic of it. It helps us change the future, and it changes us in the future. And that's the secret and the power of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not conditional on somebody else's behavior. If we insist on that, we'll remain in the position of victim. If we fail to forgive, then we're always a little separate from our Creator. And if you continue to evolve spiritually, you'll see that you forgive people, because it won't feel good anymore to carry that resentment or blame. Forgiving yourself will enhance your life in ways that you never dreamed. It will. Finances and prosperity will get better. It will. It will. It will. Physical health. And Louise Hay said, please begin to dissolve the resentment now when it's relatively easy. Don't wait till you're under the threat of a surgeon's knife or on your deathbed, when you may have to deal with panic too. And that's the admonition. Your workplace will get more enjoyable. And of course, you'll have improved relationships. That's all the benefits. And you will be closer to your Creator. And Ron Smotherman said something very interesting in one of his books. He said, forgiving someone is solid proof of your intent to live your life now while you have it, and be dead later when you are. So that's the alternative. Gerald Jampolsky wrote a book, Teach Only Love, and he said, forgiveness is calm seeing. Any emotion of thought that distresses you will begin to lose its hold on your mind when it's examined peacefully. And I know that I have forgiven people I thought I never would forgive as a kid. I never thought I would forgive my mom as a kid. And then when she died young, and she died very young, she died at 53, I thought, okay, I want to find out time when she was happy in her life, because I never knew her was happy. And I said, I'll find a time when she was happy, and I'll look for good things about her. And I did. And I found that I was forgiving her. And I did forgive. Because I knew wherever she had moved to was a better place and that whatever the next is was happening, so. Any emotion of thought, Joe Jampowski, any emotion of thought that distresses you will begin to lose its hold on your mind was examined peacefully. Behind every negative feeling is an ego request, and do not be afraid to listen to what it asks you to do. For when you see clearly what is demanded of you by your ego, you will also see that you do not want to do it. In discovering your true will, you will also discover that you are love. And we are love. And that's how we can approach life, with love in our hearts. So let's start on the path of forgiveness. Let's forgive ourselves and then forgive everybody else we need to forgive. And affirm for yourself, I forge a new path of forgiveness. Let's say it. I forge a new path of forgiveness. I experience forgiveness as release.
I experience forgiveness as release,
Freedom.
freedom,
And a new beginning in consciousness.
and a new beginning in consciousness.
Oh, I love it. Okay. Forgiveness is the eternal virtue. It is acceptance of our shadow so that we can be whole. And we can be whole. And I want to close with St. Francis of Assisi's prayer. God, we are an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, we now sow love. Where there is injury, we now sow pardon. Where there is doubt, we spread faith. Where there is despair, we bring hope. Where there is darkness, we bring light. Where there is sadness, we bring joy. We do not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we now receive, and in pardoning that we are now pardoned. And so it is.